Okay, it's 11:30. We'll probably give everyone about a minute or so and then get started. Okay, let's get started. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome, namaste to everyone. Welcome to today's special session, Finding Happiness at Work and Life. And we have Dr. Sunitha Grandhee with us. I'm Sri Ganapati from the Ford Asian Indian Association, and I'll keep the introductions fairly brief so that we can get to spend more time on the actual session and the discussions. The month of October is being celebrated as Indian Heritage Month and has been declared as Heritage Month in several states across the US, including Michigan. The FAIA events team has planned several events, month-long celebrations for the month of October, and today is our last session, culminating with the virtual annual event gala. More information on that will be coming up in the next few weeks. Today's agenda is fairly simple. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about FAIA and introduce Sunitha Grandhee to our audience, and then we'll jump into the session with an open Q&A format, time permitting. But in the meantime, feel free to enter in your questions in the chat as well. So with that, an introduction about FAIA. It's a key employee resource group at Ford. We have over 6,500 members with a global outreach, diverse group, one of the largest Asian Indian communities in Michigan. We also concentrate on three pillars, as we call it: brand promotion, people development, and community service, and corporate citizenship. Brand promotion is where we promote Ford's brand internally and externally, targeting at the Asian Indian population. We have the India Day brand promotion event where we get over 27,000 people at Novi, where the Ford brand is publicized within the community. In addition, we have several internal ride and drive events, lab tours to create Ford brand ambassadors within the company. People development is where we have a vibrant workplace of choice and putting people first. We have executive leadership programs, shadowing sessions, mentoring sessions, lunch and learns, networking, and seminars with internal and external speakers like this one. Corporate citizenship is where we enhance Ford's presence in the community through volunteer events. In fact, with COVID, we've had some online volunteer events using Ford's technology to help Mayberry Farms corn maze, which is open right now to the general public. Team also quickly mobilized and helped folks in India during the recent COVID pandemic, in addition to supporting a school in Manipur. Now for today's event, after the onset of COVID, with several folks with working from home, FAA has had several sessions in various topics in the past year or so in yoga, heartfulness, holistic well-being, meditation as well. We are having weekly yoga sessions since the onset of the pandemic on Wednesdays, and a 15-minute lunchtime meditation session every Thursday for the folks who are not aware of the program. So if you are more interested, please reach out to me. Today, we are bringing a topic which is probably in the mind of several people and the backbone of the American dream: the pursuit of happiness. We have with us Dr. Sunitha Grandhee, who's currently the director, the Center of Excellence in Applied Indian Knowledge Systems, and a passionate organic chemist who received her PhD from IIT Madras and a postdoctoral fellowship from Case Western Reserve University. She's worked for over 28 years at BASF in charge of the New Business Development Program. She has numerous publications and patents to her credit and is invited for many conferences as a guest speaker. She's a Six Sigma Black Belt and an adjunct professor at the University of Detroit. It is our pleasure and privilege to have Sunitha with us today. Before I hand it over to her to start the presentation, have some reminders. Today's session is being recorded, and I want to remind participants that they are muted on entry. So if you have any questions, please unmute yourself towards the end. And as mentioned earlier, please put in all your questions in the chat, and they'll be answered if we have the time or will be taken offline. So with that, welcome Sunitha, and handing over the ball to you.
Thank you, Sriram, and hello, everyone. Thank you to everyone for joining in this seminar today, certainly to discuss a very important topic, I guess the purpose for which we all conduct our lives, our actions. Before I get started, I would love to hear from you. What is your definition of happiness? And a second question, a follow-up question to that is, what are your expectations from today's seminar? I want to make sure that what I convey today will address these two important questions, because this is indeed the end of a very end of the year. I know you have a lot of things going on, and I want to make sure this seminar is beneficial for you. So please, I would love to hear from you before I get started on my own PowerPoint presentation, what I have here. You can just put it on the chat, and so everyone can also see and it is not repeated. Peace, contentment, and purpose. Happiness is to be very free, feeling accomplished, balance in work. Pandemic brought a lot of stress. Happiness is contentment. Learn to appreciate what you do have, not what you don't. Fulfilling potential, a life of meaning, purpose. How do we go about achieving fearlessly balancing work and life? Want to learn from perspective? Perfect. Great. Love it. I see that there is a number of ways in which happiness can be defined, life of purpose. So let's get started here then. I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation, what I have here. And trust me, it's not going to be a very heavy presentation. I realize this is about lunchtime for you. So let's get started. So I'm going to share this. Second. Okay. So happiness is definitely an integral part of everything we do. All our actions today, starting from the time I get up, starting from everything that I do at work and life, are geared towards happiness. And especially work. I think this is where we sometimes have a little bit of an anomaly. We have about 55 to 80% of us who really look at work as a way of getting money. And money is something that buys us power, fame, things that we can buy, material things. So we kind of equate that money to be happiness. So let us see from this presentation, how is this all related? Is it really money or is it something else? So I'm not sure how many of you have seen this, but there's a London School of Economics happiness survey which actually surveyed, this is a few years old, actually, it's about 5 years old. I couldn't find the latest one, but it is, you can see from here, when you look at a comparison of the happiness quotient versus the GDP itself, a country like Bangladesh ranks number one, whereas its gross domestic product is quite low. It's about 38. India is also up there, but interestingly enough, you have United States where we have the happiness rank for much lower. GDP might be the highest, but the happiness itself is far lower. And I think in this day and age, and especially in 2021, where we're dealing with mental health as a big issue, we can see how the happiness is now, obviously is low here because we go through so much amount of stress, anxiety, and so much more in terms of how it affects our physical health. Certainly, happiness is something which goes by the wayside. So the important and the key thing is, while the GDP today is about 8 trillion approximately, happiness index is something that I wish could also be measured. Don't you agree? So the economic growth for all of us should be something where we have both the happiness index and the GDP working together. So it's like this. We spend a lot of time and effort in really improving the standard of our living. We have a nice house. We make sure that we bring in a lot of things in terms of comforts in the house so that we are happy. But along with this, we are working so hard all the time to improve the standard of living that the standard of life really falls by the wayside. So it's important that both the standard of living and the standard of life, both of them have to move forward. An example that is always given is of a ship. You have the ship which has a mast, the mast which is, keeps you afloat, flying. And you have something which is also the keel, which is at the bottom of the ship. So we need a balance of the keel and the mast in order for the ship to be afloat, right? So too, it is important for us to recognize that happiness is something which comes through our standard of life, which along with the standard of living is what keeps us really the economic growth could be the best way. So I want to show you here, it's about, some of you may have heard the story about this, an American investment banker and an Indian fisherman. So this American investment banker from New York, he has just about 5 days of vacation, and he travels all the way to India to a coastal village. And when he's there, he notices as he's laying down on the beach, he sees this fisherman trying to get to get to the sea and pick up the fish. And pretty soon he comes back with just a few fish in his boat. And the American banker is surprised. Here this guy is going out and he just gets a little bit of fish and he is curious. He goes to him and he says, well, I see that, you went and you just got a bit of fish and, you could really get so much more and, open up this, big fishery and, lead that to a big business. The fisherman says, well, I could do all that, but I am happy here. So the banker is surprised. What do you do? How is your schedule here? He says, well, I get up, do the fishing, come back by 2 o'clock, have a nap, and then I go out into the village and I just have some, a nice time with my friends and come back. And by 8 o'clock, I'm asleep. My whole family goes to sleep and I'm happy. So the American bankers, he says, well, you could be in so much more. You could actually open this big fishery. You can open up a business and then you can go to New York, open up, post it on the thing. And then afterwards really make a lot of money here. And he says, then what? And well, the banker says, well, you could, after that, pretty soon you can retire and be happy and then come and, just settle down in your village. So the fisherman says, well, isn't that what I'm doing now? So, friends, many times we find that many, well, not just men, but also women, we go fishing all our lives without knowing that it is not fish that we are really after. It's a beautiful quote by Henry David Thoreau here. So, we are spending a lot of our lives making money, in this case, like he says, fish, and we do not know what exactly we are really looking for in terms of happiness. So this is a beautiful thing is, if you have an hour, you could, we would get our happiness from sleeping, from napping. Now, if you have a little more time, you could probably go to, a nice movie and a restaurant, right? And if you have a week, for example, you could actually go for a vacation and enjoy yourself. If you have a little more time, maybe you could get married in a 1 year's time. Now, if you have a little more time, you could actually just enjoy, relax, and with family. But if you know that you want to have happiness for a lifetime, then it's really key that we know ourselves. So, happiness is not time bound. Happiness is not just in the hour or the week or the time that we spend, but happiness is truly our own nature. And that is what we are trying to do here. So today we like to achieve happiness in many different ways. And here I'm using a Sanskrit word, which is paristiti. Paristiti means just changing the arrangement of things around us by which we try to achieve happiness. So, what are the different things that we do to do that? Well, one of them is location. For example, if you are working in Ford, India, you would want to maybe come to United States for a project, right? And you think that by coming to US, you're going to get the happiness out of what you want to do. Another thing is we try to rearrange the time. And the time, for example, is, we sometimes look at, okay, what is the right time to do things? Well, is it getting up at, 5 a.m. and coming to work at 6 and leaving at 2? Or is it 9 o'clock? Or again, if it is for India, you're probably working in the middle of the night, right? So we arrange this in a way to achieve this happiness. Or is it looking at different type of objects, improving the way we're improving your gadgets, maybe getting the iPhone 13 to get the happiness that I'm looking for? Or we try to get happiness through various relationships. I'm happy being single, or I'm happy to be in a relationship, in a family, married, or maybe not married. I'm happy to be a senior. So these are just ways in which, and finally, we have different activities we get involved with. Some of us like to maybe play tennis, some of us like golf, some of us like just staying at home and watching TV, or some of us like to be on Facebook, all these. So if I look at happiness as a way for achieving, then these are just, you can break it down in just in these 5 categories to look at happiness. But the problem with many of these ways in which we are looking at, we call this as Vishaya Ananda. Vishaya means object, Ananda means happiness. There are 4 defects. Let's look at really what these kind of defects could be by looking at this happiness. Now, many of you put in the chat box about achieving the balance between work and life, finding a purpose, many of those. So what happens is we are unable to focus on the purpose of our life. We are unable to really achieve that balance because our minds, if you look at it from this previous chart here, our minds are always focused on these 5 things. It could be sometimes taking a vacation, looking at, where am I going? It's looking at, pretty much the other things that I spoke about, right? So in all this Vishaya Ananda, the first one, for example, the defects. Now, it is always important, like even in Six Sigma, we start off with, the define phase. Definition phase is, let's see, where is this, let's define where the problem is happening from. So here we see that one of the first defect is anything that is related to getting happiness, those 5 things that I said, is, that is associated with pain. As they say, no pain, no gain, right? For example, if, getting involved with sports as an activity is something that I want to do, um, I might try to push myself as much as I can to become the best tennis player. But even as I'm getting to be a tennis player, there is, I'm going to be facing a certain amount of injuries. And it's not as if it's going to, I'm going to be always at a point where I'm going to be happy with it. So this is one way of looking at it. Another thing is, okay, if I take some gulab jamun, let's take a sweet, gulab jamun happens to be my favorite one. You can take any of your favorite. Well, to some extent, you can have it. If you have too much of it, obviously, you're going to face the consequences of it, right? The second thing is it is associated with temporariness. Now, temporariness indicating that today you might, enjoy the gulab jamun, but tomorrow you may not. So the same thing, cannot really give you the happiness, which is the temporariness associated with it. Pretty much everything that I showed in my previous chart has this effect of temporariness associated with it. You can think about it. You can contemplate on that. Is this really true? Another one is it has a cause dependency associated with it. Without that object, I'm not happy. For example, if I'm used to my iPhone here, or any phone for that matter, if I lose it, if I just, it is out of my sight, I get perturbed, I'm agitated. So I'm very dependent upon this object to give me that happiness, right? The other one, which I don't know how many of you agree, but it is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Again, something which needs a little bit of contemplation here. This is almost, it's an inbuilt manufacturer's defect. Because, I mean, we see this with iPhone example itself. Why are we having so many different updates? Why are we having so many, you work for Ford Motor Company, why are we coming up with constantly different models and everything? Yes, technology is great, but this is one reason why we are, on one hand looking at how we can build better cars, better things, but from a happiness perspective, which is what is tied to the standard of life, there is that dissatisfaction, which is a manufacturer's defect built into all these Vishaya Anandas. So I have this equation here, which was coined so beautifully by Swami Chinmayananda. And Swami Chinmayananda put this happiness equation so beautifully, which says, happiness is the number, it is not no, it is number of desires fulfilled, divided by the number of desires entertained. So there are 2 ways in which we could get happiness. One of the ways is I could constantly keep on fulfilling my desires all the time. I get, based on all the 4 defects that I said, I can get something new all the time and keep on fulfilling my desires. Or the other way is I actually reduce the number of desires that I entertain in my mind. So this is the only way that you will find and the happiness to increase. So an example of how do I get my desires fulfilled? I buy a house. As soon as I have this desire of having a house, I want to fill it up with, new carpets, new windows, better treatments, window treatments, everything, right? So you see how one desire leads to so many more desires. And through that, I think I'm fulfilling these desires all the time. The other way is there a way that I can come through, as one of you already put in the chat, contentment? If I'm content through an alert mind, I could actually reduce the number of desires that I have. But of course, this needs a very alert mind. And through that, I can actually reduce the number of desires. So when I reduce the number of desires, also my happiness is more. So two ways of looking at this happiness equation. One is, do I want to keep on fulfilling the desires, which is where we are today, which leads to all the stress and the anxiety that we see in our lives? Or where I look at, okay, how much do I really want? As Gandhi, there's a beautiful statement by Mahatma Gandhi, which says that, try to see how whether you want, fulfill just your needs and not the wants, right? So this, another way of looking at this happiness equation is, here you see, I want happiness. This guy is really mad here. Now, if you take that I out, just that I alone, and focus on the happiness, all you're left is happiness. So this is a Vedantic really way of looking at this, that at the end of the day, in order to get happiness or to recognize that happiness is me alone, is to remove, in a very, very simple way, the I out of it, or the ego, as we call it. Or ego sometimes can be looked at as in a very negative connotation, but ego as in individuality, the absolute individuality. So happiness is my true nature, and that true nature, when I am actually superimposing my individuality on it, then I think that, that I is me, and everything associated with that becomes I want happiness. And when that I comes into play, which is, we look at from a Vedantic point of view as something which is a superficial individuality which is imposed, then that becomes the problem here. So let us look into then, having discussed so far on what where we are looking at happiness. So far we covered how we look at happiness, what are really the ways in which we try to get this happiness, and then what are the defects. We saw that as well. And finally, we saw how that happiness that we're looking out into the world is actually tied to the individuality or ego. So any thoughts so far? Want to make sure before we go forward into the science of happiness. Okay. So what is the science of happiness? We left that portion where we said that the happiness is my true self, right? So let us analyze this aspect a little more deeper about where exactly is this happiness situation. We already saw the defects associated with the happiness, yet we continue to go towards the objects, right? And this is another beautiful aspect, which Swami Chinmayananda has given this, where he says, he's asking us to think very carefully on this. It is tied to the defects that we talked about. Is it really in the objects? Again, coming back to the example of either a car or the phone, for example, If indeed that was the case, that a car or a phone is giving me happiness, then I should pretty much be happy with that one object, right? So the same object. So the question here, Adarsh is asked if we should desire less. Okay, disappeared, but Adarsh, if you can put it again, I don't mind seeing that again. Since I'm on a PowerPoint mode, I don't get to see the chat here.
I can read it out. So he's saying desire versus goals. If we should desire less, should we have less goals and aims in life?
If we desire less, should we have less goals or no? Not necessarily. So it all depends upon the type of goals. Here we have, for example, we talked about how our happiness is tied to those five things we talked about, whether it's the material objects, the time, the activities, and all that, right? So if our goal is sometimes of higher nature, when I say higher, without going into deep Vedanta or anything, let's talk about if our desire is to go beyond this ego. I gave this one slide where I said the happiness many times is tied to our ego. If my goal is beyond my individuality, then it's a very good goal, right? So a desire for a higher goal should be the motivation. So desire and the goals are tied to each other, but yet at the same time, the way to look at it is that when the desire is for my own happiness, when compared to desire for my family's happiness, my desire for my community's happiness, so in that sense, the goal needs to be of a broader way. And so in that sense, desire and goal is tied together, but at the same time, having a goal is absolutely a must because that is a motivation for us to move forward or progress. So coming to this slide here, as we said, if indeed happiness is tied to the Vishayas, then the same object should give me happiness all the time. We touched upon this example before. Whether it is a dessert that I like, and again, I'm choosing some examples because this lecture is more close to lunchtime and you can relate to it. So if indeed that is the case, then the same object should give me happiness all the time. I mean, if I choose a particular dish, does it really, whether have it morning, afternoon, or night? I mean, why is it that we take only bagels in the morning and not at lunchtime or at dinner time? Because obviously bagels don't give me happiness during lunch. Or so that's the idea behind which we see that the same object, does not really give me happiness. So I tend to choose different things. Another thing is more of the same object should give me happiness. If indeed that is the case, then more of the bagels, for example, should give me happiness all the time. Now, that doesn't happen either, right? The third thing is the same object should give everyone happiness. We don't see this happening either. I may like bagels, somebody else may like idlis, for example, for breakfast. And we see this happening all the time. So this again is a reminder for us the way we structure our lives in how we look at only objects increasing our happiness quotient. So so we see the answer is obviously no in each case here. So then where really is this happiness? We need to look into this because this topic being finding happiness at work and life, we see that at work situations, sometimes I think that, well, a promotion is going to give me happiness, or a location is going to give me different happiness, or again, using that five examples that I said, is it a lot of benefits is that going to give me happiness? So we if we use that particular way of looking at it, we can clearly see that happiness is really not in all those five things. So what is the mechanism of happiness here? Well, good, Geeta. as well as our Upanishads, they clearly show that that happiness ultimately is truly my own nature. It is that state of tranquilness of mind. Today, what happens is when we take, as the mechanism of happiness, let's take this example of gulab jamun. When I put that gulab jamun on my tongue, what happens? At just that moment when the gulab jamun hits my tongue, I I get into the state where I feel that I've touched the highest happiness in my mind, right? Well, in a sense, what is happening at that moment is because at that point my desire for is fulfilled, my mind actually became quiet. It became tranquil. So that tranquil state of mind is actually my true nature. But we are always in the state of having a lot of this constant desires, and we equate ourselves to thinking that when I fulfill that desire, I reach that state of mind. Instead, we have to look at it the other way, which is that state of mind is my true nature, and that is where my happiness truly is. And all the time, I'm not able to equate or see that happiness which is within myself, but I feel that because of the fact that I'm not able to see that, and when I fulfill the desire and I get that object is actually giving me that happiness. So happiness truly is truly my nature, if you have to look at that way. And then, uh, if that is the case, now I have a way to structure my life. So that state of mind is really Atma. We call that Atma, or my true nature. And this identity or my ego that I show myself all the time is a sort of my pseudo individuality or my other nature that I'm projecting to the world. So my true nature is really Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat, which is existence, Chit, which is a consciousness, and Ananda, which is happiness or bliss or joy, or we call this as infinite bliss, infinite joy. And this is reflected in one of the most beautiful quotations from Chandogya Upanishad, which says that real happiness is truly understanding that I am happiness. I don't have to go for all these objects and everything for the happiness. Yo vai bhuma tat sukham na alpe sukham asti. Bhuma, which is infinite. That is my true nature. I am infinite. I am the source of happiness. And na alpa means little, very little. For now, today, I think of myself as Sunitha in a very finite manner. And that finite manner is looking for small, small things for happiness. There is really no happiness in the finite. So that which is infinite is the source of happiness. And the finite part of it, which is looking for all those happiness to get that, there is really nothing. And this is a beautiful quotation from Chandogya Upanishad. Happiness is my true nature. And to know this is what the goal of all our scriptures lead us to. So finding happiness at work and at life is really, the happiness that I look for all these objects and everything is actually the happiness that is reflected. My nature is happiness, and that happiness cannot be seen, but it can be reflected in my thought. And that reflected thought is the happiness that I actually am able to grapple with or understand. And that is the happiness which we equate it to as a happiness, but the real happiness is my own true nature. I know this is pretty deep here, and we could go for an hour just talking about that, but I'm going to leave you with just that thought, and it's a thought for reflection which you can think about. So this happiness, and this is what I'm showing here as an example for where you see the sun, for example. In the reflection of the sun, you actually see an object. And this is what we see, and we think that that is the happiness. But in reality, that reflection can happen, can be there only when there is a true source, right? So that true source is the one which is the real happiness, which is me, myself. And what I experience is actually the reflected happiness here. So this is, as an example from Starbucks, for example. Um, we have this happiness which shows in three different ways: Priya, Moda, and Pramoda. These are three different levels of happiness. Just want to make sure and give you guys enough time for questions here. But this happiness that I'm looking for in simple things like this coffee, it gets reflected first as a desire called Priya. Priya is when I think of happiness. And then when I actually go to the counter of a Starbucks shop, and I, order say a latte or something, and then it turns into moda. And when I have the cup in hand and I'm trying to drink it, that's pramoda. So in all this, there are three stages of this happiness that is built in, which is, through this reflection of my own happiness in as simple a drink as Starbucks here. So this happiness is what is we say is reflected in that thought. It's a reflected thought which finally gives me the state of what is that happiness. So now to understand this aspect of why is this, we say the true nature is that of happiness here, is that the only thing that is common through anything and everything, all that you go through here, is that aspect of existence and consciousness. If you break down any aspect of all the things that I went through previously with the thought, with the different, whether it's the activity, objects, etc., the one thing that exists through all of them is the fact that I exist and I am that consciousness. Again, a very deep aspect of it, but something you can reflect through this thought process, what I just presented to you of this happiness aspect here. And we have this power to abide in this infinitude by truly understanding that aspect of who am I. And that is really the key for our happiness, which is what we call as moksha or liberation. It's extremely logical, extremely scientific from the point of view of the process in which you lead to it. And so you can see how this mechanism of happiness is to understand truly what my own nature is. And finally, I want to leave you with this beautiful chart, again put together by Swami Chimananda, which truly shows how we identify ourselves through our various equipments of our body, mind, and intellect. And in this state of body, mind, and intellect, we actually take on these roles of being a perceiver, feeler, and thinker. And in these roles, we interact with the world of various objects, emotions, and deep intellectual thoughts. And through all this, we try to gain the happiness that we're looking for. But in reality, we are way beyond this aspect of it. So in a sense, there are two identities of ours. One of them is our absolute consciousness, and this other aspect which we portray ourselves to the world, as well as what we think who we are, is this level of body, mind, intellect. So these two personalities here, but in a sense, we are way beyond that. So the we are like I've shown here, what we know, even as we interact with various things in the world, we know, for example, when I take this cup here, I know the cup is not mine, right? So too, the body, mind, intellect is only an instrument to which we transact in this world. And in order to experience a change, we have to be outside the change, right? We see the changes outside us. So obviously, we are outside it. So this is again to show that happiness is really my true nature here. And that is the happiness we should be looking at or going towards as we look at each and everything in our in the activities and everything. So I will finish here. It's 12:16, and leave you and ask you if you have any questions.
All right. Thank you, Sunitha. There are some questions on the chat. And at this time, I'd like to encourage people to unmute yourself. If you have any questions, we can go that way. Or if you have any other new questions, you can feel free to put it in chat and I can read it for you. So Atul Purohit had a question. Atul, you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Sri. So there was a slide that you had about desires, number of desires, and divided by number of desires entertained, I believe. So the question was like, do we even have to have like goals in life, right? Because in my opinion, we were just born to live, so purpose should be just to live, right? Rest of the things is, in my opinion, again, is nothing but a learned behavior. Like, by college, society, or parents, we were told, hey, set higher goals and just keep chasing for the rest of your lives. Nobody really talked about happiness while chasing those goals. It could be a rough patch. So again, coming back to the question, like, do we have to have goals at the end of the day? Like, how much one person really needs, right?
So it is absolutely necessary for us to have goals. The difference, though, is we need to see how the goals can be changed to a selfish goal to an unselfish goal. So the purpose of actually our human life is to convert our selfish goals into an unselfish goal. And this can be possible only with the complex, sophisticated equipment that we have been given. If we believe in rebirth, we have come through many ages, many generations, many lives. Um, and we have now been given the sophisticated equipment of the intellect, which can allow us to convert our selfish goals to an unselfish goals. So in that sense, a goal is absolutely needed. The only thing is to change the desire itself.
Can you please elaborate a little more on the selfish and unselfish goals?
Certainly. So selfish goals is if I'm looking at in a way that whatever I do, that should benefit only me and me alone. So, for example, let me just give you a very maybe a very simple example. I have a garbage truck which comes on Fridays to pick up my garbage, and I find that my garbage thing is totally full. And if I decide that, okay, I'm just going to leave all the garbage, any excess garbage right outside my house, and I'm not going to worry about how it is going to be taken, whether it is safety or anything for the garbage truck guy who's coming and taking it, then I'm being selfish. You know, I'm just giving this as a very simple example here. But in a sense, the idea is selfish is when I'm just looking out for myself and I'm not worried about the environment in which I live in.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
I understand.
thank you.
Sunitha, I have a question. So fundamentally, how do you define happiness? Let me explain where I'm coming from. As we are growing up at an early age, when we are a child, when we don't know what happiness is, it was ingrained into our mind, saying that what you want, if you achieve what you want, that's happiness. There is no measure for it. It depends on the state of the mind of where you are to define what happiness is. For example, if I say I have, if I hit something and I have pain, I can measure it to see how painful it is, whether I can bear it or do I need any assistance. But there is no definition for happiness. The fundamentally, as we are growing up, we were ingrained to say whatever we achieve is happiness. So it's purely a state of mind where we are. So as you go further down in your presentation, you started talking about Atmas and the state of Atma and achieving Atma. That's the state of mind where you are to see how you're going to see happiness. So how are you correlating all these different aspects to say happiness to what we want?
Very good. Thank you, Venu, for that question. You mentioned two things. First of all, you said that as we're growing up, we are asked to, keep looking for things for happiness. You also mentioned about this aspect that pain, I know what is extreme pain. So we today equate happiness as only something where I get an object and I feel this elation, I feel so excited, I'm really excited, and we say that excitement is happiness. But happiness is really not that. Happiness is that, imagine, the sinusoidal wave curve, you have this top, which is this extreme elation, and the bottom one, which is pain. So happiness, the tranquil state, is actually that center line, which is independent of whether you achieve something or you don't achieve something. That is happiness. And in the beginning, as children, yes, it is very hard for us to grasp this. But as we grow older, it is about time that we understand that happiness is independent of whether we achieve something or we don't achieve something.
Yeah, I agree. That's the reason why I asked the question, because when you go through this happiness index and measure for a country to be happy at a certain point and a country not happy, it is based on the state of mind. How can we assign a number and say we are happy at that country is happy and this country is not happy? It's their state of where they are and whether they achieve what they want or not. So that's why I'm lost right at the beginning when you said a country like Bangladesh is number one and a country like US is 49 or whatever the number is. That how are we concluding that this is the state of happiness of a country?
So today you can actually look at the mental. So there are reports on the mental health. The number of suicides a country has, a number of the mental diseases that they go through and everything. So you could equate a lot of them to the mental health issues, for example. That would be one way you could do it. I do not have time to look at comparing those through all over the globally, but that is one way you can do it.
All right, let's move on to the next question. It's from Jay Narasimhan. Jay, do you want to ask the question? Unmute yourself, please.
Hello, Sunitha ji.
Hello.
This is about conflicts. Let's say you're at peace at a given point of time, and then through this Maya, we constantly face these vibrations that disturb your peace. For example, I just quoted there is this vaccine test on animals. How do we maintain our inner peace in such situations where you cannot really do anything about it? I have to take my vaccine because I don't want to be a mutant factory. But I am taking the vaccine knowing that some unknown animal might have been suffered.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we deal with this? And we constantly face such conflicts.
Mm-hmm. So many times we have to recognize the extent to individually how much I can be a contributor to either a happiness part of the entire world or to the pain of the world, right? And there is a larger aspect of what I'm part of for which I really do not have a large control. Let's say let's take this example before I come to answering your question exactly. Is I work for Ford Motor Company, okay, and in the job that I'm doing, there is one aspect where I'm trying to do this work in the lab, and there is leading to a lot of wastage. Okay. If I'm alert enough, I will try to do my job to the best way possible so that I have minimal amount of waste. To that extent, I have a control over it. I also have control on how I speak out in a meeting and let the company know on how we could do things better, right? So, taking that same kind of an example to the question that you just asked about the vaccine, uh, we can try to do to the best extent to our possible with the vaccine, for example, to take it, but yet uh, but be knowledgeable about what it can do or not do, and try to help the community to advise on what it can be, so it's sometimes there is a certain small amount of short term that we may be involved, which we are not able to do something, but through knowledge and through being alert we can actually help out. But the second thing which is also done is that whenever I'm not able to do something independently on my own, I can offer a prayer, which actually, as thought, it you put it out in the for the community, and to that extent, that helps in its own way towards helping the larger good. So two things. One is I try to do the best I can on my own. Second thing is to things where I do not have a direct control, I try to offer a prayer.
Okay, thank you for the answer. Any last questions? We have a couple more minutes. If not, we can wrap it up.
I can ask, hopefully a simple, this is a complicated topic, right? Just the equation, Sunitha, you have on the screen. And I think it goes back to what Atul was probably mentioning. So can I read it as I could have a level of happiness either by fulfilling all of my desires if I have too many of them, or I just reduce my entertained desires to a level where it doesn't matter whether I fulfill them or not, right? So if I have a zero entertained desires, my happiness by default becomes infinite in mathematical terms, right?
Correct.
So is
That
that
is
how you think? Like, so the the goal here is to kind of control the number of entertained desires so that we are in control of achieving, our fulfilling our desires, so we stay happy.
exactly. And if you look at this from a practical standpoint also, it really allows us to prioritize our energies. Many times we tend to get involved with so many different activities and stuff like that, where we don't pay attention to how our energy is being dissipated. So keeping this in mind, you will see how in the long term it really helps us to keep our priorities to the minimum and help us also. Yeah,
Got it. Thanks.
you're welcome.
All right. Thanks, Jazz, for the question. I love how you brought down happiness to an equation and trying to solve it that way. But
This is all Swami Chinmayananda's, so I just wanted to give that credit. So I find that it's yeah.
okay, we are out of time, but on behalf of Ford, thank you, Dr. Sunitha Grandhee. Today's topic was really interesting, not just for me, for the rest of the people as well. And this is the first time we are having such a topic, which is pretty close to everyone's heart. People think about it. Nobody talks about it because they don't know how and what and how to approach it. So in behalf of Ford Motor Company and FAA, I'd like to thank you so much for taking your time off your busy schedule and spending some time with us this afternoon and enlightening us. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Sri. I appreciate it. And I really appreciate the questions that were brought out by all the group. They were extremely practical and valid questions, which we need to think about as we structure our life. So I thank you for that opportunity.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Sunitha ji.
You're welcome.
Thank you.